today's video I want to share with you how to build this applicant tracking system using Excel. I'm going to take you through step by step all the different parts, all the sheets, all the VBA coding, everything that you need to do so you could build this on your own and custom fit it to your exact needs. Ready? Please stay tuned. Let's start with the data structure of the file. You can see there are 3 sheets that are blue and there are 5 sheets that are gray. The blue ones are the front end sheets. Those are the sheets that I want the user to see and play with. The gray are the sheets that I don't want the user to play with. They're going to be hidden. Within the code, there is a part that when you open the file, it will hide those sheets. I also added a button here, unhide data sheets, which will unhide them. For this tutorial, let's leave them unhidden so you can see everything. So in the data sheets, we have a jobs database. Jobs database is where the user needs to log the jobs. The key of the table is the job ID, which should be unique. There's the entry time, job title, job location, hiring manager, department, job type, recruiter name, internal agency, opening date, and number of positions. All of these are data that the user needs to input. Now I created user forms here, so the input of the information is easy for the user, but also theoretically the user can input this data manually, but again, I don't recommend it. Over here on the right, we have some formulas. So in the file, orange columns are formulas, blue columns are data input. And I put the formula on the first row, and part of the code will copy these formulas down to the last row, which is the next job inputted. So the number of positions already filled, I'm going to count the number of positions filled that match this job ID in another sheet, which we haven't looked at yet, called Apps Database. In Apps Database, we're going to identify when the position was filled by a person, and then it's going to populate this number. Open positions, number of positions minus filled. Last fill date, this goes to another sheet called Events, Apps Events Log, and looks basically for the first match available. This table is sorted, so it's going to find the next, the last fill date. So I'm looking for the job ID with the text job filled. That's the match function. So I'm looking for that within a special column that I created that takes the job ID plus the event, and I'm just going to find the last fill date. Manually closed date, that's a date that's going to be inputted by the user whenever they update the job and they want to close it. And the status, that is the status of the specific line. So if it's manually closed, that is the status. If there are more open positions than filled, it's active. If they are equal, it's closed in full. And this is very important because we're going to use the status later on in the other sheets. So this whole part, this whole blue area is what we're going to use when we create a new job. All of this here. Apps Database. Apps Database, this is the information coming from a form called New Applicant or Update Applicant. There's the CV submission date, which is whenever you create the new applicant, the job ID, applicant name, and their source. And again, this could be typed in manually, but I do recommend using a form. Then there are a lot of formulas here. Does it appear in main? And this is going to be helpful because I'm going to use that to filter results. So I'm checking, first of all, if K3, which is still active. So still active is checking whether or not, if the job was filled, then it's not active, right? We have a few ifs here. If the job is filled, it's not active. If the last result is passed, then it is active. If the last result is scheduled, it is inactive, and otherwise no, because I have few statuses here: declined, failed, passed, and scheduled. So declined and failed, it's not active, and job filled, it's not active. Assuming the job is active, I am checking if that job ID exists here in the job ID column of the pivot table that we are basically searching for jobs. So if that exists, then I'm giving it a yes. Otherwise, no. A key that's going to be used for searches, combination of job ID and name. Last event, just looking for the last event from the app's event log. I'm using the same trick that I showed you before with a certain key and looking for it over here. Last result, just looking for this in a different column, in the result column. Okay, that was looking for the event, this was looking for the result. Event date, another column, column D, same formula using the index match. Still active, we talked about, and now I'm pulling the job title, location, basically all of the information from the job ID using index match. I'm using index to define the range, which is A2 through ZZ, whatever, just so I have the entire table. And it's important that when you use index match that the row starts with your headers, and then I'm matching the value, which is the job ID for the first column, which is column A over here, and I'm matching L2, which is the job title. Again, this is matching the headers, and you can see the $ for the job ID on the letter, and for the header it's on the row, and I can just drag that along and it will work perfectly. Job filled, this is a row I'm using, column I'm using just to check if the event name, the last event, is called job filled. Time to fill the job, if this is a yes, it's the event date minus the CV submission date, because I only want to see how long it took to fill the job from the moment they submitted their CV. Filled counter, if this is no, give it 0, otherwise 1, because I want to count the number of filled positions. Filter job in dashboard, I'm going to use that for some filtering, and I'm checking if over here, these are the list of jobs that I'm filtering. Whenever I filter something here, this pivot table filters, and I want to see which jobs are still part of the list. Again, I'm using that as a trick to automatically filter jobs using a different trick other than pivot table. The only problem with the pivot table is if you have to refresh it all the time, and some of the data is not linked to the same pivot table. So that was the jobs database and the apps database. Okay, so a lot of information here. Apps event log, this is going to log every event. So when you click on update applicant, you're going to update, I'll show you, you're basically updating in the process which events the person went through. Every time you do something like that, it's going to be logged over here with the job ID, name, event, and the date, result, and completed by. And once you do that, there are a few formulas. There's the keys, just a combination of names, so 3 different keys. Here I'm checking if this job ID is filtered in the dashboard, as you saw before, and event number for sorting. I'll show you later what this does. And we'll get to that later. This will be used to sort the data, because what I want to show the last event, and I have here in the lists the events. I may schedule someone and then he'll pass. I want to make sure that the last event showing is the past one and not the schedule, and that's why I'm using the event number. I'm giving the number that this the result the event, which number that is and which number the result is. So essentially I'm getting a number for the event, which is over here, so it's going to be a number between 2 to 7, and for the results 2 through 5. I'm dividing that number by 10, so I'm going to get a number between 2 point something to 7.5, and that way I will have the ability to sort it properly. Okay, so that's how I sort after I sort by the date. The event cycle, in this sheet I'm actually pulling the data and I want to calculate how long it takes between the different events. So first of all, I have here, I'm pulling all the values using unique over here, all the values in apps events logs. I'm going to have all the job IDs and all the applicant's name in a unique way. Then I'm going to ask if the job ID appears in the dashboard slicer. Same trick, looking at the pivots, looking if they were sliced. And now I'm just going to find the date using index match. This is where I use the keys. The key is a combination of job, name, and event. And I'm just going to use that over here. So it's job ID, name, and event. And once I find that, I will retrieve the date. And then it's just the time, this minus this. And it's the same trick all over. And eventually I'll be able to calculate the average of this. So those were the four data inputs. Then we have some pivot tables. So we have a pivot table. Let's take a look at that one. By applicant source, and all the pivot tables are based on apps database. So you got the applicant source as a row and average time to fill job. You just add the time to fill job and make sure you select average. Another pivot table is just the job ID. That's it, that's all I have here. Another pivot table, I have the applicant source and what do I have here? The sum of filled counter, which is the row that I have here, the 10, and I've also added a counter for the name of the applicants. So basically I get for each source how many people were hired and how many people appear. Over here I have the tables that I'm going to use for the charts. So for each event I'm going to use the average ifs to check if the job exists, and this is basically looking at this, averaging if, but only if I have a yes for this. So any line that's filtered, if I filter something here, let's filter June. So if I filter something here, you'll see these will not be included in my average. So it makes it dynamic and easy to show. And I'm going to use that for the chart that you see in the dashboard. This is another analysis, how many people. So now I'm checking in the events log for the submission. I'm checking also the status. So I'm going to the apps event log. I'm counting again how many people have passed, failed, or scheduled per event, and only if it's filtered. Okay, so that's what you have here. You have the yes for the filtered event and the passed, failed, or declined. Percentage of success, take how many passed divided by all three. And I want to check how many actives there are. I'm just going to use that directly in the apps database because I don't want to repeat. I have this text. Now I like to use shapes that pull data from text, from cells, so I just use the sum, concatenate, active applicants in pipeline. And the last part here is for the icons. I have number of hired, so it's text plus get pivot data. Whenever you mark a pivot table, it automatically gives you this formula that you can change. I don't need to change in that case, but I'm going to keep it. Same thing here for apps per day, so I'm going to divide the number of applicants by the filled counter and just going to round it, so it's a nice number, round by one digit. And days to hire, that's also taking it from a different pivot table over here. So those were the data sources that we use here. And they can of course be done, they can be filled out manually, updated manually, but I really recommend that you build these user forms, which I'll show you later how to build. The last, let's say, simple part of here is the lists. You define the lists with the job titles, location, job type, all of that good stuff, and that's going to populate our selections in the user forms. Let's talk about the main sheet. This is the sheet where you're supposed to spend most of your time updating jobs, updating applicants, and doing your day-to-day activity. You can see that the main sheet has three areas. This area, jobs that match the search, where you have the job ID and other inputs, and applicants for the searched jobs. On top you have slicers. The slicers control the pivot table. So if you want to see the positions in London, you're going to see only the positions in London, and you're only going to see the applicants that match that same search. So in this case, I have two job IDs, and only for one I have someone matching that job ID and still active. So they're going to appear here. Over here on the right, you have a status slicer that you can change if you want to see historically jobs, like jobs that you manually closed, meaning you still have open positions, jobs that you close in full, meaning you have filled out the job entirely, or ones that are active where you have open positions. So most of the time this would be selected as active, just to show you all the open positions. So how is this built? This is just a pivot table, nothing fancy about that. So this is a pivot table on jobs database. Let's unhide. So you just take the jobs database and create a pivot table. I'm just going to change it to 999 so I have more rows. And then you can just add whatever columns you want, like job ID, like job title, job location. And to change the formatting, by default you see you have this this formatting. Don't remember how it's called. I just go to Design, Report Layout, and Show in Tabular Form. Then I remove the subtotals, I remove the grand totals. Okay, and I have the same structure. And then I'm just going to add slicers in Pivot Table Analyze, Insert Slicer. I'm just going to add the title, location, whatever entities I want. Then I can just move them to the upper part of the screen. And what I like to do to all my slicers and all my shapes is to right click this, Size and Properties, go to Properties, don't move or size with cells. What that does is now if I change the dimensions, the slicer doesn't change, which is very important in my opinion. Otherwise, if I remove this, let me show you. You see how the slicer change and can overlap another slicer, or you lose everything. So that's how you build the first part, which is this area right here. Of course, you can change the coloring if you want to color it in green. Just click on the slicer. Over here in slicer in the middle, you have different colors that you can play with. You can change the dimensions to make sure it matches. So there's some design to that. So that's this table over here. This table, you can see, is built dynamically. I'm filtering the apps where column F equals yes. And if you remember, we talked about it earlier. In apps database, I have some columns that are helping me to show data dynamically. You could build another pivot table and enter a code that when you update some of this, you update the other, but I think this flows much quicker and less, it's more proof for mistakes. So this will filter columns B and C to include if column F is yes. The last part is going to show NA if nothing has a match. If let's say like this, okay, so you see it just gives you NA as in unavailable. So let's go to apps database. So it's going to return these columns based on column F. Column F is very simple. It's checking two things. First of all, it's checking if it's an active job. If you remember, we checked active jobs based on the last event. Okay, sorry, the last event and the last result. So that depends on that. Assuming it's active, for example, this one, then it's checking if this job ID is found in the main over here, meaning it was filtered. So if it was filtered like 98, then it will appear over here, and this is where you get the yes. You see, for 98, it appears. So that's a very strong function that I recommend that you're familiar with. Filter. It's dynamic. It works all the time, and it's very easy to use. And I do it twice. The reason I have it for two formulas is because I have a gap. Here I'm retrieving B and C, and here I'm retrieving H through J. That's it. It's very simple. That's how you build the main. The dashboard we talked about. The last part is to deep dive now into some VBA code to show you how you can build part of these nice functionalities. By the way, to build the ribbon, I'm using an external software called Office Ribbon X. And I've created a video just on that. I don't want to go into that, so you can check it out. I'll add a link to the video. So, deep dive into the code here, just to show you a few things. There's not a lot of code here. There's just some user forms and some nice functionality. Okay, so what do we have here? We have functions for the showing the form. New job.show, that's going to show, you see there are 4 forms here, each have their own name, and when I want to present them to the user, I'm using this. So the name of the form, .show, that's going to show the form. That's very simple. There are 2 functions here that I use. Number 1 is clear slicers. That's the button over here, clear all slicers. What this will do, it's gonna clear all slicers. It's actually a code that I picked up from somewhere, and it works. So only parts that I added were these 2. So switch application.calculation manual and automatic. This will change Excel to stop calculating. It's what you can do here. If you go to options, formulas, it switches from manual to automatic, and this is useful whenever you have long macros and you want to speed them up. So I just did that. I took it from another file that I had, so I used it there, and there's no harm to keep that. An application screen updating false. What this does, it stops the screen from updating. When Excel does things, it updates the screen. It also makes it run quicker. So here I'm giving it manual and false, then automatic and true. And this is the actual code. It just goes through all of the slicers and just clears them. So I'm just going to use that. And unhide all, also something that I've used in the past. Again, you see I'm using the screen updating, so it doesn't show you exactly every sheet that it's unhiding. It's a very simple code. 2 worksheets, WSWD. WD is the active sheet, and I'm just looping through all the sheets and actually this is not even needed. I just need WS. but for each worksheet in worksheets, ws.visible equals true. Next. And back to whatever, oh, I see, that's why I needed that. Back to whatever sheet I was. That just helps because if I don't have this part, it's just gonna, when I unhide, it's gonna show me this sheet, and I don't want that. I want to be in the same sheet that I was before. The ribbon, this part is basically when you create a ribbon, you have to assign buttons whenever you click. So that's that part here, I call ribbon. Some of them are very simple. So for example, create job, that just references the new job function that is over here, sorry. So basically it's calling this sub, basically it's creating the same form. The others, these are, again, these are a bit more complicated. What I do now for this, in this case, I'm looking for the last row in that sheet. Basically, whenever I click on updates or new applicant or update applicant, I want to make sure that the user is in the main sheet, and I want to make sure that if they're updating job, I want to make sure that they're in this area, sorry, this area, because I want to reference the job ID. And if they're updating an applicant, I want to make sure that they are actually in this area, so I can reference that person. So if I try to update an applicant here, I'm going to get this line. If I try to update an applicant here, I'm going to get this message. Please move to main sheet. Okay, again with update sheet, select the line with the job ID. That's what you see over here. So first of all, I'm checking which sheet I'm in. So if active sheet.name is not equal main, then I get this message box, please move to the main sheet and exit the sub. Otherwise, I'm checking if the active cell.row, active cell is the cell that I'm currently in. If it's less than 9, meaning it's over here, or it's greater than the last row, and the last row would be 14. So if I'm not between 9 and 14 in this case, I'm just going to say, please select line with a job ID. I'm using the same trick for creating an app or updating an app. The only thing that changes is the location of the last row. Here I'm still in line 1 because it's a new app. So if I want to create a new applicant, I want to reference the job. Okay, and you see this is why it's helpful, because I can automatically pull the data very easily for that job instead of asking you to select it. So yeah, it's the same trick. I'm looking for the area based on a column and row. So those were the models. They are very simple. I have here in the workbook also a simple routine that will hide everything based on the color of the sheet. So whenever you open, this says to Excel, whenever this workbook is open, if I'm declaring a worksheet as WS, again with a screen updating as you saw before, simple loop through all the worksheets. If the color of the tab is 165 each, which is this color, I'm just going to hide the sheet, or visible equals false, otherwise visible equals true. And I recommend using this technique of referencing the tab color, because then it doesn't matter what text I have here. With a simple code, I can just hide all 5 sheets. Otherwise, I would have to start writing if the name is equal this, if the name is equal this, or using select case. But this is just a much more easy way to do it. In the end, I want to activate the main sheet. So when the user enters the system, he sees basically the main sheet and only those 3 blue sheets. Okay, let's go back to that was here. I don't think I have any codes in the other sheets. Yeah, they look very clear. All right, now let's deep dive into the user forms. So I've built 4 user forms: new applicant, new job, update app, and update job. So if you're not familiar with user forms, I do have a video just on that, how to create the user forms, but I'll show you really quickly some of it right here. So this user form is built of a few functionalities, or I don't know how you call it, but controls, sorry. So we have labels, which is all the green ones are labels. These are boxes basically that show information. We have text boxes, for example, applicant name, that's a text box, you enter information. We have a combo box, which is these three, which is giving the user ability to select. And we have, where is it? Command button. Command button is the submit button. When you click it, something happens. So those are the four that I'm using here. There are others, but these are the main ones. These are labels, you can see over there. And adding a label or anything is very simple. You go to controls, text box, and I've added a text box. So I've added all of them. And now let's talk a little bit about formatting. So you can format everything. You see over here the back color, for example. You can change that to any color that you want. You can use the system or the palette. Border color, you can have a border color, you can have a border style. This is the caption. You see job ID. This is the label name, label 14. That's when you use the code, you're going to reference the name of the label, label 14, not the caption. That's important. If you want to change the text, go over here to font. You have more options. If you want to change the height, I like to use standard height and width over here for all of them. So for example, these are 30 by 78. These are 30 by 170. Okay, so at least it looks very nice and standardized. The background, you can also change the back color. You see I changed it from, it could be like this, it could be like this. And I tried to have the user forms look all the same layout. You see they all have like blue background, green for title, label, grayish for data that's going to be populated automatically, and white for input. Now let's take a look at the code, because there are a few things that automatically populate and happen, and how do you create a combo box. So I'll show very quickly, I won't go over everything. So here on top I'm declaring all of the functions, and I like to use option explicit and private, because that way I use this for the entire all of the functions below. Instead of declaring a function every time, I'm just doing it over here for everything. First thing is for the submit click. So whenever you click on submit, this is what happens. For I'm setting the destination or the worksheet to be apps database. I'm checking first of all if the mandatory fields are entered. So I'm checking combo box 4, text box 1, and combo box 5. And if either of them, the length, I'm using len or the length. I'm not checking the value, I'm not checking this. This is the best way to check if something is inside. So if the length is 0, then I'm giving this message. Either enter the CV submission, applicant names, or results. And if you want to see how that looks, and please enter the CV submission date. Please enter this applicant's name, and please select the result. So it won't continue if you don't fill all those, and that's pretty good to do if you have some mandatory fields. The next step, all the mandatory fields are filled out. I want to copy the data. Here I'm using again the false for the screen updating. The reason I didn't do it before is because if in any case you want to exit the form, you always have to bring back the screen updating. So I didn't want to do it up until here. From this point on, the code will run, so it's okay. Looking for the last row in the destination using this pre-built function. So I'm looking for the last row over here because this is a new applicant. Okay, so I'm going to find the last row. That's where I'm going to put in the data. Then, and this is just to be on the safe side, how to build a date. So I'm going to pull the month, date, and year from the combo box number 4, and then I'm going to use date serial with year, month, and day to input range A. Range A is the CV submission date. Okay, I've just noticed that in my testing sometimes there's a problem with this, so this is the best way I found to make sure that the date is a date is a date. So I'm using left, middle, and right. Left, just like the functions in Excel. So I'm looking for left, 2 digits, middle, from digit 4, 2 digits, and right, the last 4 digits of combo box 4. Combo box 4, that is the CV submission date. Okay. Then I'm gonna paste for column B, C, and D the values from each of the controls, either label 13, text box 1, or combo box 3. Let's see what that is. Label 13, that's the job ID. Applicant sources combo box 3, text box 1, and combo box 5. Then I'm going to add the formulas in the apps database. I have a formula line over here all the way, and I want to copy it to the last row that I'm pasting. So I'm going to use copy and paste, referencing the last row. Okay, so range copy, range F with the last row. The last row again is the last row that I'm pasting. So I did that. Now I'm going to events logs because I want to create an event called CV submission date. Remember, in the events log, I'm logging every event that the apps did. The apps database is like their current position. So I'm using the same trick, last row for that events log, and just pasting all of the information. Here I already used the date serial as before. Adding the formulas, same trick. I have a formula line which I paste, and then I want to sort the table. You can see I'm activating the sheet. I like to activate the sheet before sorting. It makes sure less mistakes happen. For sorting, you reference a range, then you issue the command sort. The first key, the range, meaning what are you sorting, and this, for example, this was for so I'm sorting by date. Descending, you can switch this to ascending or ascending. The header, yes, meaning it's including, there is a header, so exclude the first line. And the second key is range 2, order descending for K2. So the order is by this, and then by event number for sorting, which I showed you before why I'm doing that, to make sure that the first line, because I'm using VLOOKUP, I want the first line to be the most updated line, but also I want to make sure that the first line represents the past status and not a scheduled, because sometimes they both appear for the same date. Okay, what else do I have over here? Then I'm activating the main. Okay, so all this happens when you click on submit. When you put this code, private sub user form initialize, this is what happens when the form is created. Every time it's created, this is what happens. So I use the sheets lists, and that's for all the drop downs, and destination is going to be main. So combo boxes lists. All right, so to create the combo box list, this is how you can do it. It's a formula, combo box.list equals a certain range. In this case, since I'm doing it a lot of times, I'm just using a fixed formula that I have. So I'm referencing a range that's based on the column and the last row. So you see I have a dynamic column and a dynamic row starting from row number 2, and I'm finding that column to be 13. So I'm just going to, so in this example, 13 is the applicant source. So I'm looking for the last row, and I'm going to find that the last row is number 5. So I'm going to have a range 2 through 5, M2 through 5. That's what this code does, and populates the combo box. In this case, it's a bit different for the dates. For the dates, I'm using my date equals now, and I want to allow the user to input dates between last 10 days and next 5 days. Now this helps me for 2 cases, and by doing so, I am making sure that the user inputs a date, and I'm making sure that the date makes sense, that it's not too far out or too back in history. And this is a different technique. I'm using a for loop. Basically, I'm creating each value. You can see I'm using combo box 4.add item, and now I'm adding an item using format to make sure this is the format, month, day, YY, and date add using this day, I, and my date. Day meaning it's adding a day every time. I is the integer that's moving. So that's how it creates dates in a dynamic mode. The result combo box, same. I'm just using this. I don't expect more results, so I'm just referencing a fixed range. Add the entry date and job ID. So the caption, this is where I'm using the main, where I am. So I'm adding the caption for the job ID. And what else am I capturing here? And the job title. That's how you see it immediately. Opening date is numeric. Okay. Here's where I'm separating for the job ID. There's a problem sometimes when you I'm trying to use a match. And if you try to use match for a number, you have to multiply it by 1 to be on the safe side. If not, you use the same text that you have. So this is where I'm checking if the label that you entered for job ID, if it's a number or not. If it's a number, multiply by 1 and search. If not, leave as is. That's just the way I use it to make sure that I find a match. And here's where I'm using it. Label 19 caption is the range J plus last row, or it's not really last row, it's the row that I'm looking for, but I was too lazy to add another parameter. So it's going to give you the opening date. Here I'm increasing the font size and colors for submit. So this is also something I do. When you can control the dimensions of your control buttons using VBA Code, and you don't have to manually go here and change everything, because you see this is gray in a certain area, but when you create a new app, the color is green. So that's what I did over here. I changed the font and everything. This is also something I had previously, so I just used that. And that's it. That's an example, simple example. The others are pretty much the same. They're not very different. They have their own change. All right, so this was a long video. I hope you found value in it. Quick recap. We talked about how to build a dashboard, which is always good for you for any Excel file that you want to have some analytics with slicers and everything. We talked about how to build the main sheet that has dynamic connections between tables. We talked about how to build different databases, and each of them having different formulas and functionality. Generating a list sheet that you can use for drop downs for user forms, or even drop downs without user forms. We have all the buttons. We at least deep dived into one user form to give you a glimpse of how to use it. It's not mandatory. You could do all these things without it. And that's it. I highly recommend that you try to build this file on your own by following this tutorial. If you don't, you can always contact me or leave a comment or check out the file. I have it on my Patreon page or my Etsy shop, along with much more files that you can use. Have a good day. Don't forget to subscribe. Bye-bye.